Hi everyone, welcome to Class 5, Intro to ABA. Today I'll be going over group contingencies and token economies. For this presentation, I decided to make it Halloween themed. I know that Halloween's coming up this weekend, and even though it might not look the same as it usually does, I think it's still fun to celebrate in small ways. So next, let me go over the agenda. So today we're first going to be talking about group contingencies, then we'll go into token economies, reinforcers and punishers, behavioral contrast, and extinction burst. So first starting with group contingencies. So independent group contingency, the contingency is presented to all, but earned by only those who meet the criterion. So for example, maybe in PE class, students are told to do a scavenger hunt, and as long as one of them is able to solve the scavenger hunt, the whole class gets a reward. For dependent group contingency, this is when the reward for the whole group is based on the performance of either an individual or collection of individuals within the group. This can be called a hero procedure when an individual earns a reward for the whole group. An example of this when I was teaching is that we used to implement an intervention called First Step to Success, and one of the components of First Step to Success is a dependent group contingency. So for example, if a student is able to get a certain number of points for that day, they can choose a fun class activity for everyone to do. And so not only is this rewarding the student by giving them a choice and preferred activity, but it's also building their relationship with their peers because they're able to help their peers get an enjoyable activity as well. And it also helps the peers get involved in encouraging the student to exhibit positive behaviors. So next we have interdependent group contingency. So in this one, all members of the group must meet criterion before any member receives a consequence. This is an all or none procedure. So one example I always think of is that in growing up, I remember that there would be book drives and reading competitions. So if the whole class was able to read a certain number of books by the end of the year, then everyone would be given a pizza party. And again, by making this a whole group effort, it encourages peers to encourage one another along with the teachers because everyone has to be in it together in order to achieve the end prize. So next we have token economies. So a token economy is a token economy system is a method used to try and reinforce or increase the frequency of a target behavior. And within a token economy, there's what's called primary reinforcers and secondary reinforcers. A primary reinforcer is an innately reinforcing stimulus like a food or drink. So it's something that we naturally need as humans. It's not something that we were taught to want. Whereas a secondary reinforcer is a learned reinforcer that gets reinforcing power through its association with the primary reinforcer. So in a token economy, this would be the token. So you may have seen this in your classes when you've been growing up. Sometimes teachers will have a marble jar, sometimes they'll have a sticker chart. So different ways that tokens can look. But a lot of times teachers will incorporate this as a part of their classroom management strategy. So for example, the class can earn 20 marbles and then they will get a pizza party. So we're going to watch a short example of how a token system looks. For this example, it's a one-on-one token system as opposed to a whole class, but you can see how she is very consistent and quick to give this child tokens whenever he does a positive behavior.
All right, thanks, bud. Here we go. Ooh, says a monkey. That's right. Ooh, says a monkey. Fantastic, Ethan. And let's do another one. You brush your teeth. That's right. You brush your teeth. Good job. Here you go, Munchkin. Good. That's okay. Touch your mouth. Oh, good. Touch your mouth. That's your mouth. Touch your mouth. That's your mouth. Okay. That's fine. A bee says? Buzz. That's right. A bee says buzz. Nice answer. Better.
So we're going to skip
D,
ahead.
you got it. You nailed it.
So we're going to skip ahead to see what happens after Ethan earns all of his tokens.
Oh, you got all of your tokens. Here we go. You got it, buddy. Fantastic working for your tokens, Ethan. Whee! So what did you want?
What's an apple?
Okay, good. Thank you for looking and asking. Here you go. It's yours.
So here you can see in practice how token economy can be applied in a one-on-one ABA technique. So you saw that each time that Ethan was able to respond to the directions, she gave him a token. And then the times that he was not able to comply or respond to the directions, he did not receive a token. And at the very end, he was able to exchange his token for a prize of his choice. So a really important part of the concept of token economies is this idea of unconditioned and conditioned reinforcers. So unconditioned reinforcer is or also called a primary reinforcer, are reinforcers that do not need to be learned. These are all primary drives that we have for basic survival, and if they are deprived in any way, gaining access to these reinforcers is very motivating. So examples is food, water, oxygen, and warmth. We all need these things to survive, so it's just a natural reinforcer. Whereas a conditioned reinforcer, also known as a secondary reinforcer, is something that needs to be learned through pairings with unconditioned reinforcers. So for example, money is a very popular and generalized learned reinforcer. So by itself, money is a useless piece of paper, but with the pairing of money and access to unconditioned reinforcers, money becomes a valuable thing. So as a hint, money is also what's known as a generalized conditioned reinforcer. So generalized conditioned reinforcers are consequences that has been paired with access to many different reinforcing consequences until it took on reinforcing properties itself. So even though money is a man-made object and technically cannot give us food or warmth like the primary reinforcers can, it can purchase those things because of our society's laws. So that's why it's now considered a generalized conditioned reinforcer. So reinforcers can be classified by their attributes. So for example, there's edible reinforcers, so highly preferred food items, sensory reinforcers, so anything that affects pleasure to the senses to the individual. So this can include sounds and vision, so maybe a good song or if we see a beautiful painting. A tangible reinforcer is any tangible item that a person values. So this again can go back to being money. In a classroom, it could be stickers or tokens. In an activity reinforcer, it's the opportunity to have fun or take a break, which is what we saw that the students selected in that previous video. So that could be going fishing, watching TV, jumping on a trampoline. And then finally, we have social reinforcers, which is any positive or desired attention or interaction with another person that can serve to reinforce. So how does this look in a classroom setting, especially with what we were talking about with token economies? So in this case, token or point systems, when implemented with fidelity, can be paired with tokens or points with access to a wider range of backup, primary, and secondary reinforcers. So that can include free time, preferred items, activities, certain privileges. While many schools are now discouraging food as rewards, that has been a popular one in the past. So maybe they can earn enough tokens to get food. So the tokens would then be the secondary reinforcer and the food would be the primary reinforcer. So next we have punishers. So we have unconditioned and conditioned punishers. So an unconditioned punisher, also called a primary punisher, describes when a punishment that works without prior learning. In other words, people come into the world with a need to avoid these things built into their biology. So for example, people generally want to avoid things that are extremely hot or extremely cold temperatures, extremely loud noises, or hunger. Whereas a conditioned punisher, also known as a secondary punisher, is a stimulus change that decreases the future frequency and occurrences of behavior that is based on an organism's learning history with the punishers. In other words, organisms are not born wanting to avoid these things. So here's an anecdotal example. So a high school student with a history of significant reading difficulties and lack of appropriately trained teachers had many aversive experiences involving books. For example, teachers and parents have ridiculed and yelled at her for not being able to sound out words. So while this example is unfortunate, it does happen in real life. Sometimes when kids are first learning to read, they can become very discouraged, especially if the adult working with them is not appropriately encouraging them. And so because of this constant negative interactions and the association with books, this student now has a negative, has now seen books as a conditioned punisher. So again, let's look back at token economies. So what about in a classroom setting with a token economy? So a condition punisher may kind of go in line with what's called a response cost. So a response cost occurs when a reinforcement is removed for an undesirable or disruptive behavior, also known as negative punishment. So in a token economy, the tokens can become a secondary punisher or condition punisher if a token is removed when a student exhibits disruptive behavior. While generally this is not recommended, it does occur in some token economies where students are taken away tokens, which means that they have to take longer in order to get the prize that they could turn in for their tokens. Again, I don't think that this is generally recommended though when actually implementing a token economy, unless based on the individual student's need, it makes sense. But usually you do not want to start off a token economy with a response cost. Behavioral contrast. The behavioral contrast describes the rate of responding to stimulus in one setting changes when the condition of reinforcement in the other setting gets modified. So for example, a child eats cookies at the same rate given the presence or absence of his grandmother. One day, the grandmother punishes the child from eating cookies when she is present. This results in reducing the cookie eating when the grandmother is in the kitchen, but increases the cookie eating in an alternate condition of the grandmother being absent. So in a classroom setting, if, for example, a student had started shouting a lot in math class and science class at the same rate, but then his math teacher decides to ignore his behavior each time he shouts, then then the student might start shouting more in the other class as a result, because it was taken away from him in one setting but not in another. And finally, we have extinction burst. So extinction burst describes when sometimes a behavior that is being targeted by an extinction procedure will initially begin to decrease and will instead do the complete opposite and actually increase, a temporary increase in the frequency, duration, or magnitude of the target response. Unfortunately, in an applied classroom setting, sometimes a teacher or a paraprofessional or another practitioner who's implementing an intervention may become discouraged because they're implementing the intervention and then the behavior gets worse. So then they may be thinking, okay, why is this happening? Does this mean that the intervention isn't working? That's not necessarily the case. So let's go ahead and go over an example. So for example, Brian screams to gain attention from his teacher. When the extinction procedure is first implemented and Brian is alone for a few minutes, he begins to scream. When Brian engaged in this behavior prior to the extinction procedure, his teacher would have come over to him straight away and given him the social attention he wanted. But this time, his teachers don't come over to him. This could be quite unexpected for Brian, so he may consciously or unconsciously feel he has to try harder to obtain the teacher's attention. To try harder, he shouts more than he normally would, he shouts for a longer period of time than he normally would, and he shouts louder than he normally would. So in this case, Brian's teacher may be thinking that this intervention is not working. However, with over time and with consistency, it is likely that Brian's behaviors will decrease. It makes sense that when we're trying to rely on something that we've been doing for a while, maybe we think at the moment that we just need to try harder in order to use that same method to get what we want. But then once we see that that's not working, we'll then start to adopt new ways for getting the thing that we want. So in this case for Brian, he used to scream to get attention. He tries to scream more because in the past, screaming got him attention. But over time, Brian may realize that this isn't working, and then he'll try to adopt hopefully a more positive behavior, like raising his hand or participating in an appropriate way. All right, so that's all I have for this week. Happy Halloween, and I hope everyone has a great weekend.